The cold was sharper than she had expected, far harsher than the chill of any winter she had ever known. It wasn't just the physical cold that cut through her, though. It was something deeper, something that seemed to come from within the very earth beneath her feet, as if the world itself had frozen over. Marissa's breath caught in her throat, a sudden gasp that echoed in the silence of the night, sharp and jagged like the ice that now blanketed the ground. As she stumbled out of the cottage, her knees nearly buckling under the weight of the air's frigid assault, she realized how unprepared she was for this moment, for the gravity of what it meant to leave behind everything she knew, everything she had become. The thin fabric of her coat offered little defense against the biting wind. It was all she had managed to grab in her panic, a mere token of warmth in a night that demanded more than she could offer. She pulled it tighter against her chest, a futile attempt to shield herself from the storm of thoughts and emotions that raged inside her. The fabric seemed to mock her weakness, billowing out like a flag in the wind, a helpless symbol of her own vulnerability. Still, she held it close, as if the very act of clutching the garment could protect her from the storm in her mind, from the memories that would not stop chasing her. The door slammed behind her with a hollow thud that echoed through the stillness of the night. It was an empty, final sound, the kind of noise that would haunt her in the moments when she would look back, if she ever did. The wind swallowed the sound almost immediately, its howl claiming the night, leaving no trace of what had just happened. The door was shut, but it had not been slammed with the kind of force that might make her reconsider, that might make her pause and rethink. No, this was the kind of decision that could not be undone, and she knew it. The silence that followed was a void, deep and unforgiving. And still, she stood there, frozen in place, as if her body was reluctant to fully embrace the reality of what she was doing. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. They were raw and stiff from the cold. But the trembling wasn't just from the temperature. Her fingers shook with a kind of nervous energy, a rawness that she couldn't suppress. The shaking was a reflection of the chaos that had taken root inside her. Fear, guilt, desperation, anger, all of it swirled together in a tumultuous storm that made her feel as if she were about to collapse under the weight of it. She clenched her hands into fists, trying to steady them. But it didn't help. The tremors only grew worse. But there was no time for hesitation. She knew that. The past had caught up with her in that house, and she could feel the weight of its memories pressing down on her, suffocating her. The walls, once familiar and comforting, had become prisons. Every corner of that house held a fragment of her past, a moment she couldn't outrun, a memory that refused to fade. It wasn't just the house itself. It was everything tied to it, the people, the choices, the mistakes. They all lingered, thick and suffocating, and she couldn't breathe. She couldn't stay there anymore. The moment for running was now, or it would never come again. That was what she told herself, the lies she had to believe in order to keep moving forward. She was too far gone to turn back now, too far gone to face the consequences of her past. All she had left was the cold, the night, and the hope, barely a whisper, that she might find something better on the other side of it. But she couldn't afford to think about that right now. There was only the now, only the need to keep going. Her lungs burned with the cold as she exhaled a shaky breath. The air was sharp and stung her nostrils as it rushed into her chest. But it didn't matter. The pain was a relief. The night air was filled with the scent of frost and earth, sharp and invigorating. But it also carried something darker, something she couldn't quite name, a sense of finality, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. She could feel the weight of the earth beneath her, the frost-covered ground crunching beneath her boots with every step. The sound seemed to echo louder than she expected, a constant reminder of her solitude in that moment, of the sheer isolation of her decision. The wind howled around her, biting at her skin, tugging at her jacket, pulling at her very will, as if it sought to pull her back to the house, back to the life she was leaving behind. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her body moved on its own, driven by a force deep within her. A desperate pull she couldn't quite explain, but felt in every fiber of her being. It was as if her feet knew the path, even when her mind didn't, as if her heart had already made its decision. And now, all that was left was to follow. Her breath was ragged now, a mixture of cold and fear that left her gasping with each exhale. She pushed forward, step after step, though every part of her wanted to collapse into the snow and give up. The cold wasn't just physical. It was emotional, mental, and the weight of it threatened to break her. She wanted to stop, to look back just once, to see if anything in the cottage had changed, to see if anyone would come running after her. But she couldn't. There was no time for that. She wasn't sure if anyone would even notice she was gone. The thought lingered in her mind for only a moment, like the briefest flicker of doubt, but she shook it off. There was no one else to think about now. No one else could save her. Only she could do that, and she had already made her choice. The past would have to remain behind, locked away in the dark corners of the cottage, swallowed by the night. As she walked into the darkness, the wind finally began to ease, as if it too had accepted her departure, had begun to fade into the distance. The night stretched before her, endless and unknown, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a strange sense of freedom. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was something new. It was the beginning of something that had been waiting for her just beyond the cold and the night. And so she walked on, with only the crunch of the frost beneath her feet and the distant howl of the wind to keep her company. The night was thick and oppressive, stretching out over the fields like an endless, ink-black ocean. Each step she took seemed to echo through the void, the silence so deep it threatened to swallow her whole. The wind howled like some wounded beast, its cold fingers clawing at her face, yet she barely noticed. The land around her was unrecognizable, an expanse of darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The trees, once familiar, now appeared as twisted phantoms, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, clawing at the empty air. Each shadow seemed to shift, morphing into something more menacing, as if the night itself were alive and watching her every move. She couldn't even remember when the horizon had blurred into nothingness. The line between earth and sky had faded long ago, leaving her adrift in the suffocating blackness. The world felt like it was closing in on her, pressing her down with an invisible weight that made it hard to breathe. In that moment, she felt small, insignificant, like a speck of dust drifting through an endless void. But still, she pressed on, for she had no choice. The path ahead, however uncertain, was the only one she could follow. Her legs ached, her body screamed for rest, but her mind was laser-focused. There was only one goal, the barn. She couldn't stop. Not now, not when it was so close. With each step, her heartbeat thudded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat that drowned out the wind's howling, louder now, as if mocking her every effort. The cold seeped deeper into her bones, but she couldn't afford to falter. It wasn't just her body that was weary. Her mind had begun to feel the weight of the darkness, too. It whispered doubts, urging her to turn back. What if it's too late? What if you can't make it? But she ignored it, forcing her mind to focus on the barn, the one beacon in this endless sea of black. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered silhouette cutting through the night like a dark sentinel. It was a fleeting promise of safety, a place where she might, just might, find warmth. It had been a long while since she had last sought refuge in its humble walls, but the memories of its comfort were enough to fuel her steps now. The lantern outside flickered weakly, casting a faint, trembling light against the darkness, as though it, too, was struggling to stay alive in this world that felt so alien. But still it stood, a lifeline in a storm of doubt. As she neared the barn, the climb up the small hill became steeper with every step, as though the earth itself was resisting her progress. Her muscles burned, each movement a war between exhaustion and the unyielding force of will. Her legs felt like lead, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she refused to stop. Not now. Not when the promise of safety was within reach. With every painful step, the barn seemed to grow larger, towering over her like a fortress. Its sturdy walls, battered by time and the elements, stood as a silent vow that, at least for tonight, it would provide shelter. But she couldn't afford to think too much about that. She had to keep moving, her gaze fixed on the wooden structure ahead. There was no room for hesitation. No time to look back. She couldn't. The shadows around her were shifting. Strange noises, perhaps the wind, perhaps not, whispered in the distance, urging her to turn, to run. But there was no turning back. Finally, she reached the barn's door. Her hand, slick with sweat despite the chill in the air, reached out toward the old iron handle. It was rough, worn by years of use, the metal cool under her fingers. Her hand trembled, not just from the cold, but from the tension of the moment. The door, made of weather-beaten wood, creaked in protest as she turned the handle. It groaned under the weight of its years, a sound that echoed in the stillness, louder than the wind itself. The door slowly gave way, opening into the barn's dim interior. Warmth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It wrapped around her like an old, familiar embrace, fragile and fleeting, but comforting nonetheless. It was a warmth that spoke of long-forgotten days, of the laughter and bustle of a place once filled with life. Now, the barn was still, its wooden beams heavy with the scent of old hay and leather. The smell, mixed with the faint scent of earth and wood, was grounding in a way that the harshness of the night never could be. It reminded her of simpler times, of a life before the shadows crept in. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The faint glow from the lantern flickered weakly in the corner, casting a soft halo against the dark wood. It was enough to reveal the barn's quiet, hollow emptiness. She didn't care. She was here. Her shoulders slumped in relief as she took in the familiar sights. The piles of hay stacked neatly in one corner, the dusty old tools hanging on the walls. The loft above that had once echoed with the sounds of laughter and movement. There was no one here now, but it didn't matter. The barn was a sanctuary, a reminder of a life she once knew. She sank to the floor, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion it had been holding at bay. Her hands trembled as she pulled her coat tighter around herself, trying to hold onto the warmth, trying to hold onto the sense of safety that had become so elusive. But for tonight, it would have to be enough. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the barn wash over her. The wind outside was still howling, but inside it was quiet, still, safe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to rest. The barn was a sanctuary of silence, save for the occasional groan of the beams above, strained under the weight of the wind that howled outside. The flickering lantern cast dancing shadows, long and twisted, stretching across the worn wooden floor. The walls of the barn seemed to tremble in response to the storm, but the inside remained untouched by the chaos of the world outside. Here, in this dim, quiet space, the barn felt alive. It pulsed with something ancient, something almost sentient. It was as though the barn was not just a structure, but a witness, watching her, waiting for her arrival. Her breath came in shallow bursts, each inhale heavy with the weight of her escape. She had closed the door behind her with a soft click, the sound almost swallowed by the dark. For a moment, she leaned against the door, her back pressed against the cool wood, letting the stillness surround her. Her chest rose and fell in rhythm with the quiet beating of her heart, but that familiar feeling, the one that had followed her all day, the one that made her skin tingle and her pulse quicken, lingered. She wasn't safe yet, not by a long shot. Her mind raced with fragments of thoughts, each one a jagged piece of the puzzle she couldn't quite put together. There was something waiting for her outside the barn, something dark and relentless that wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. But here, in this cold, shadowed space, there was something she hadn't expected to find. A sound, a soft shuffle, the rhythmic thud of hooves on the dirt floor. She stood still, the world around her quieting as she listened more intently. The sound was familiar, soothing even, like the gentle rhythm of a heartbeat she had long forgotten. There was no mistaking it. She didn't need to see the animal to know who it was. Orion. The name, even in her mind, brought a deep warmth to her chest. Lucas's horse, sure, but there was something more, something deeper. Orion had always been more than just a creature of flesh and bone. He was a part of her, a tether to a past that seemed so far away now, a piece of the world before everything had unraveled. She could feel him in the air, like an invisible thread connecting them, even though they were separated by the darkness of the barn. His presence here was not a coincidence. It felt like fate, pulling them back together, pulling her back to a time when things made sense. Her heart skipped, the emotion rising in her throat. She hadn't come here to see Orion, not consciously anyway. Her escape had been motivated by fear, by the need to run from whatever shadow was lurking behind her, threatening to drag her back into the storm. But somehow, deep down, she had always known that if there was any place that could offer her even a fleeting moment of peace, it would be here, with him. The horse, with his gentle spirit, had been there for her in ways no one else had been. His presence a quiet reassurance in a world that felt increasingly unstable. She could feel his gaze even before she saw him. There was something about the way he moved, the way he stood so still, yet radiated life and energy. Her fingers, almost unconsciously, brushed against the rough, weathered wood of the stall door. The memories rushed back to her in a flood. The sound of his hooves striking the floor, the deep, steady rhythm that always seemed to calm the storm inside her. She could still remember the feel of his warm breath against her hand, his muzzle nudging her gently when she needed it most. His eyes, deep, knowing eyes, always seemed to look right through her, as though he understood her in ways no one else could. There had been a time when she thought she could almost hear his thoughts, his quiet wisdom speaking to her without words. She could almost hear his soft whinny, a sound that had always made her feel safe, that had grounded her when everything around her felt like it was falling apart. It was as if time had stopped, and she was back there again, standing in the barn with Orion, safe and protected before the world had torn itself apart. But this moment was different. Tonight, there was something sacred about it, something deeper. It wasn't just the memories flooding back, or the presence of Orion that calmed her. It was something in the air, in the very bones of the barn itself. Had they been part of a story much older than she had ever realized, a story that had been written in the lines of the land, in the heartbeat of the earth itself. She felt an unexplainable connection to the barn, to the horse, to the land she stood on. As if in this moment, she was no longer just a fugitive, a woman running from her past. She was part of something bigger. The weight of her past, the choices she had made, and the world she had left behind. It all came rushing back in a single, bittersweet wave. And yet, there was something else, something in the quiet that made her feel like she wasn't alone. Not in the barn, not in the world. Orion was there. He always had been. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely lost. The barn, with all its creaks and groans, held its breath with her, waiting for something. The storm outside howled louder. But within these walls, there was a stillness, an unspoken understanding that no matter what came next, she was not walking this path alone. As she slowly opened the stall door, the smell of hay and earth enveloped her, and Orion stepped forward, his muzzle brushing gently against her palm. The connection, so real and so powerful, surged between them. No words were needed. In that moment, the barn was no longer just a building. It was a sanctuary, a witness to a reunion that had always been meant to be. And as she stood there, side by side with the horse who had always understood her, she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance to find her way back to something real, something that mattered. The air inside the barn was thick with the scent of hay and earth, the familiar warmth of the place, a stark contrast to the cool, sharp evening that lingered outside. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Marissa reached for the weathered handle of the old barn door. The metal was cold under her fingers, but as she twisted it, There was a soft groan from the hinges, an old sound, one she had heard countless times throughout her life. It was a sound that carried with it a weight of memories, of moments long past, of a life before things had fallen apart. The door opened with a reluctant creak, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to vanish. The soft hum of the evening breeze, the chirping of crickets, the distant calls of birds, all faded away. Inside, there was only him. Orion stood tall in the center of the dimly lit barn, his coat a dark, glossy silhouette against the shadows. Even in the low light, his presence was undeniable, his muscles rippling beneath the sleek surface of his coat. He stood so still, so composed that for a moment, Marissa wondered if she had imagined it all. But then his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, locked onto hers, and she felt her heart skip a beat. They were steady, unwavering, dark and profound, as if they could see straight into her soul. He didn't blink. He didn't move. It was as if time itself had stopped. The world, with all its complexities and turmoil, seemed to disappear. There was no past, no future, only the present moment between her and Orion. She stood in the doorway, unable to move, her breath caught in her chest as his gaze held her captive. In those quiet moments, Marissa saw something she hadn't noticed before, something that had always been there, but she had never taken the time to acknowledge. It wasn't just the intensity in his eyes, it was the unspoken understanding that existed between them. His stare was not judgmental or critical. It was calm, steady, and somehow comforting. It was as if he had always known the pain she had carried with her, the burden she had hidden from the world, and somehow, miraculously, he accepted it. No words were needed. She felt her heart race as memories began to flood her mind. The moments of pain, the time she had felt completely alone, the time she had stumbled, trying to keep everything together. But Orion had been here, through it all, even when she hadn't realized it. His silent presence had always been a steadying force, a calm in the storm. She took a tentative step forward, her legs feeling unsteady, as if the ground beneath her might crumble at any moment. Her hand, trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation, stretched toward him. The touch of her fingers against his neck was like an electric charge, a sudden surge of warmth and energy that shot through her, igniting something deep within her chest. The knot of tension, the weight of all the unspoken emotion she had carried for so long, began to loosen, just slightly, but enough for her to feel it. Her throat tightened with emotion, and she fought to keep herself together. But the dam was breaking. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the unspoken connection. Perhaps it was the relief of finding someone who understood her in ways she couldn't explain. Whatever it was, it overwhelmed her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. The words came out shakily, as if the apology had been trapped inside her for years, fighting to be released. For everything. Her tear fell before she could stop it, tracing a path down her cheek. But she didn't wipe it away. She couldn't. The tears, for once, felt like a release, a way to let go of the weight she had carried for so long. Orion nickered softly, the sound low and almost comforting, and leaned in her touch, his large, powerful body relaxing against her hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't shy away. Instead, he stood there, solid and unwavering, as if to say, "I understand. I'm here." In that moment, Marissa felt something shift deep inside her. All the years of pain, of isolation, of self-doubt, they all seemed to dissipate, at least for the moment. Orion had no need for words, no need for grand gestures. His quiet presence, his acceptance was enough. He was a silent witness to everything she had been through, to all the dark corners of her soul that she had kept hidden from the world. And somehow, despite everything, he was still here, still waiting for her. She stood there, her fingers tracing the curve of his neck, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath his skin, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel something other than the weight of the past. She felt safe. She felt seen. And in that quiet moment, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. Orion had always been with her, and he always would be. The barn was quiet, save for the soft rustling of Orion's movements as he shifted in the hay. Marissa stood in the midst of it all, her body leaning against the rough wooden beam, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the fragile comfort of this space, the dim light, the smell of hay and leather, the warmth of the horse's presence. It was a refuge, a temporary escape from the storm that had been raging in her life. But even as she breathed in the calm, she knew this peace wouldn't last. She couldn't stay here forever. Her eyes wandered to the horse, his dark coat gleaming in the low light. She had always thought of him as a symbol of strength, of something unshakable. But now, standing there, she realized that even Orion couldn't shield her from the chaos waiting for her on the other side of this barn door. The horse was a bomb, a distraction, but he wasn't the solution. The real question loomed larger with each passing second. What happened next? What did she do when the reprieve ended? When she had to face the reality of her choices, her past, her future? What came after this fleeting moment of silence? The sound of boots on the old wooden floor jolted Marissa from her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat, a rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins as the familiar echo reverberated through the barn. She turned slowly, feeling the comfort she'd found in Orion's presence evaporate in an instant. There she was, Evelyn. The horse trainer had always been a silent presence in Marissa's life. Strong, capable, unyielding, Evelyn had a way of observing, of knowing without speaking. Her eyes could pierce through walls, and she rarely let her emotions slip. In all the years Marissa had known her, Evelyn had said little, but her gaze always spoke volumes. And now, in the quiet of the barn, she was standing in the doorway, her figure cutting through the dim light like a blade. Evelyn wasn't just observing anymore. She was here to confront. "What do you think you're doing, Marissa?" Evelyn's voice was calm but steady, with a quiet strength that seemed to make the air thicken. There was a challenge in her tone, a knowing edge that made Marissa's stomach twist. Marissa froze, the question landing on her chest like a boulder. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't know how to answer. She didn't even know what she was doing here in the first place. It was like she had been running from something deep inside. And now that she had stopped, she was left with nothing but the echo of her own fear. "I don't know," she finally whispered, the words coming out in a fragile breath, more of a confession than an answer. The admission felt raw, exposed. Evelyn stepped forward, her boots thudding softly on the wood, each step deliberate, her presence growing stronger with every inch she took toward Marissa. "You don't know?" she repeated, her voice sharp but not unkind, like a reminder rather than a reprimand. "You're playing with fire, Marissa, and once it burns, you won't be able to put it out." Her words hit Marissa with the force of a slap, a cold splash of reality. Evelyn was right. She had been reckless, careless with the choices she had made, and now she was caught in the aftermath. The weight of those decisions pressed down on her, suffocating her. "I didn't mean for it to be this way," Marissa murmured, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to bring him into this, into my mess." Evelyn's gaze softened, just a fraction. For a moment, Marissa thought she saw something like sympathy flicker in those sharp eyes, but it was fleeting. "It's not about the mess, Marissa," she said, her tone softer now but still firm. "It's about what happens when you start to unravel. Things don't stay neat and tidy. You can't keep pretending everything's fine." The words cut through Marissa deeper than she had expected. She had been pretending, hadn't she? Pretending that she had it all under control, that she could fix everything, that she could outrun the truth. But no more. The facade was slipping, and Evelyn was here to watch it fall apart. Marissa swallowed hard, her throat dry, her chest constricting with an emotion she couldn't name. "I don't know what to do anymore," she confessed, her voice barely audible as it cracked with the weight of the admission. "I don't know how to fix it. How to fix me." The words spilled out like a dam breaking, each one a release. A surrender to the truth she had been fighting so desperately to avoid. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure she could carry the weight of her own self-doubt. Evelyn's eyes softened with something akin to understanding, a rare tenderness in the midst of her usual steel. She took a step closer, her gaze never leaving Marissa. "You don't have to fix it," she said quietly, her voice carrying a depth that reached past the surface. "You just have to face it." Marissa looked up, meeting Evelyn's steady gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, everything was still. The barn, the horse, the night, everything seemed to hold its breath. Marissa felt the truth settle in her bones. She didn't have to fix everything. She didn't have to have all the answers. But she couldn't keep running. She had to face the mess, the choices, the consequences. She had to face herself. And that, for now, was enough.